Welcome to the America 250 PA Start Here, America Did podcast, telling the unique stories that make up the diverse fabric of Pennsylvania.
Hi again, and welcome back to another episode of the America 250 PA Start Here, America Did podcast. I'm your host, Sydney Harris, and though I am your host, I really like to think of myself and the other hosts of this podcast as tour guides, where we have the wonderful opportunity to travel across Pennsylvania, stopping along the way for stories of what Pennsylvania is, what it means to its people, and what it means to the nation as a whole. Today, our story is one of the past, a story of loss and revival, a story that does not wish to remain as history. Let's point our maps to Lititz, Pennsylvania. Known as the coolest small town in America, this Lancaster gem is renowned for its artsy culture, warm soft pretzels, and the welcoming smile of its people. A place where I currently call home. And it was through Lititz I first visited the Wolf Sanctuary of PA, the topic of today's story. At the Wolf Sanctuary, just a few miles outside of Lititz, I learned about Pennsylvania's wolf history, how Pennsylvania lost its wolf population before the 1900s, and the consequences of this eradication, as well as the people who are working to safeguard and revive the wolf population. To the workers of the Wolf Sanctuary of PA, wolves are not the big and bad creatures that storybooks would have you believe. In fact, through guided tours of their facilities, workers seek to dispel common myths about wolves and provide a more accurate and respectful image of this species. Today, to give us an audio tour, I'm happy to welcome Michelle Mancini, the educational coordinator of the Wolf Sanctuary of PA. I'm even more excited to talk about the story of Pennsylvania wolves. Welcome, Michelle. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So first, could you give us a brief overview of the Wolf Sanctuary and what is your mission?
Our primary mission here at Wolf Sanctuary of PA is to rescue gray wolves and wolf dogs that have been displaced, usually from household settings, sometimes from zoos or other animal care facilities that are unable to care for them. So our mission is to give them a lifelong home here and provide care for them. And we have a secondary mission of educating the public about gray wolf conservation and dispelling some common myths about them.
And the Wolf Sanctuary spans over 80 acres and has been operating for the last 40 years. How did this all begin, and why was this piece of land in Lititz, Pennsylvania, chosen to house wolves?
So basically, the property was the home of the Darlington family. And they had a love of wolves for a very long time. They had acquired some wolves and wolf dogs and were caring for them already. And in the 1980s in Pennsylvania, the laws changed regarding wolf and wolf dog ownership. So you needed certain permits from the USDA, the federal government, and also the Game Commission, which is the state government. You needed certain fencing, certain, shelters, different things like that. And so they went ahead and got in compliance, actually above and beyond compliance. Their enclosures were huge, all natural territories, got the fencing that they needed, everything they needed, permits. And then other places that had wolves and wolf dogs in the state started to get their animals confiscated because they weren't in compliance. So organizations like the Game Commission would contact the Darlingtons and ask if they could take rescues under their permitting and care for those animals since they already knew how. So we've always been a rescue since the very beginning, and we were incorporated as a 501c3 nonprofit in 1993, and that's when we started to build up our tour program, and we've continued to grow from there.
And can you explain the process of how a wolf or wolf dog comes to live at the sanctuary?
Every state has different requirements regarding wolf and wolf dog ownership. They're very different than domestic dogs, which are their relatives. But domestic dogs were bred to be man's best friend, to live in a household with them, to be obedient, to listen to instructions and training and things of that nature. Wolves and also wolf dogs rely on a set of instincts that allow them to survive in the wild. And so caring for them in a household setting, it doesn't usually work. It's not to say that they're particularly nasty by nature or anything like that. It's actually more just that the instincts that allow them to survive in the wild just don't work in a household setting. So for example, as a basic example, wolves scent mark their territory. It's in their nature. They feel most comfortable in a place that smells like them. And part of that involves peeing on things. So, house training, getting them to pee outside just doesn't make sense to them. It's not that they're not smart. It's that they just don't want to do it. That's a very benign example, but more extreme examples involve, separation anxiety. Wolves are social. They're pack animals. They want to be with their pack 24/7. And so they don't understand things like work schedules or vacations or anything of that nature. So they end up having trouble in a household setting because they have to be left at a certain point during the day.
And on your website, you say that wolves have been plagued by myth and misinformation for centuries. Could you elaborate on some common misconceptions about wolves that you aim to correct through your work?
One of the biggest ways that wolves are often painted inaccurately is as the villain of the story. So Little Red Riding Hood, even things like Disney movies, Beauty and the Beast, even Frozen. They're often painted as these vicious creatures that just want to go after people. And that obviously gives them a very bad reputation. It's very negative. It instills a lot of fear in people. And then that in turn can drive people to want to get rid of them from the environment. And those prejudices led them to be almost completely wiped out from the lower 48 United States by the early 1900s from overhunting and also habitat destruction at the time as development started to happen. So we really want to try to paint a more accurate picture of them. On the other hand, there's another myth about wolves that, because domestic dogs descended from a relative of wolves, they may resemble them. And so people want to think that they're really cute and cuddly and they're these sweet, majestic creatures. And while they are really awesome in their own right, it's important to also not view them, as pets. Because like I said, they don't do well in a household setting and they do rely on a separate set of instincts that allow them to survive in the wild. They're still strong predators. They aren't cuddly pets. So we try to find some middle ground. We're trying to teach the true story of wolves, that they should be respected for their own qualities, for, how cool they are in their packs, how they have their social dynamics and how interesting that is and how important they are to the environment and to the ecosystem, and how they really don't belong in a household setting. They belong in the wild for the most part. And if they were already raised in captivity, then they belong in a place that respects them for their true nature.
And as you said, the wolf population was eradicated. What are the biggest threats to the wild wolf population in modern times, and how does your organization combat these threats?
The biggest threat to wolves has been and remains to this day humans. Bottom line, we are their threat. They don't have any natural predators. They are at the top of the ecosystem. They have other animals that are parallel to them, like, cougars and bears and things that they coexist with and might compete with, but nothing hunts them except us. So we really are the threat. Wolves were wiped out by the early 1900s. They were placed on the endangered species list in the 70s, and then they were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park in 1995. And after that, they started to rebound. Their population started to recover. But as soon as their population started to recover, that pressure from human civilization started again. So in states where they have recovered, they're now allowed to be hunted again. And hunting them not only reduces the strict number, but if you're actually killing a member of the pack, let's say one of the parents or the breeding pair, you're actually not just killing one wolf, you're killing maybe several generations from that pack. You're completely disrupting the whole dynamic of the pack and threatening the wolves that already live in that pack and any generations that would have come after. It is a constant struggle, a constant balance. Obviously, human development continues to happen, possibly encroaching on some of their territory. They need a lot of space in the wild to survive, to be able to hunt their prey so that they don't drift into agricultural areas. So humans are the biggest threat from development and also hunting. And here at the sanctuary, our primary way to combat that is basically through education, to try to teach people who come here and also to share, through our social media and through our website, important facts and important information about wolves, about how important they are to the ecosystem. When they returned to Yellowstone after being absent for 100 years, when they returned in 1995, they saw a lot of benefits to the ecosystem. Wolves are called a keystone species because they affect all the other animals in their environment around them in the ecosystem. So removing them in the early 1900s allowed their prey species, elk and deer populations, to expand to the detriment of the ecosystem. So they were overbrowsing the vegetation. They were killing a lot of natural native shrubs and plant life. which was a lot of habitat and food for other animals. And so when they brought wolves back, they not only decreased the elk population, but they kept them moving away from the areas where they used to linger, allowing that vegetation to grow back, which allowed other species to return. So teaching people about that, that they might not know that role that wolves play in the environment goes a long way towards then further down the line, people might then change their minds about how they want to deal with wolves in their environment.
So when I visited, I learned that many of your wolves come from different parts of the country and different sanctuaries. How does the Pennsylvania sanctuary contribute to broader wolf conservation efforts?
The East Coast tends to be much more positive about wolves than the West Coast. And I really think that part of that comes from the fact that there haven't been wolves here. So in 100 years. So wolves did return out west when they were reintroduced to Yellowstone, but they've never returned to the East Coast. The closest wolves we have are, probably the Great Lakes region around Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, that kind of area, where there is still contention about wolves. But on the East Coast around us, people tend to view wolves more positively. So being that we're a 501c3 nonprofit, we don't get involved politically. So we stick to that education. So the people who come here, the people who visit, the way that we try to get the word out, we try to talk about conservation and the importance of conserving wolves out west in states where they do exist so that people can view them differently. And then on the flip side, as you mentioned, we do rescue wolves from all over the country, from sometimes another country. So we do have a rescue from Canada. And I just want to also reiterate that all of our rescues are coming from captivity. So they're coming from household settings or other zoos or sanctuaries. We don't often get rescue requests from wolves from the wild unless it's, an escaped animal that was captured because they escaped, but they originated in a household setting. So we're rescuing wolves from all over the country. And so another thing that we're trying to educate through our tours and through our rescues is not to view them in that pet view as well. So as I mentioned, that's one of the other myths. On the flip side, not necessarily viewing them as a villain, but also viewing them as a pet or a cuddly, cute, friendly animal can also be detrimental because it could potentially encourage people to have them as pets, which in a captive setting isn't good for them. It's not a healthy environment for them. The media contributes to this, shows like Game of Thrones when it was out showed, these really cool dire wolves as pets and it looks really cool. But the thing is, like I said, they just don't fit in a household setting. So that our education is twofold. We're trying to educate people both about conservation efforts in the wild and also about the importance of not having them as pets. Even in states where it might be legal outside of Pennsylvania, it's still not a good idea. They don't thrive.
I'd love to talk about you personally for a second. Why did you decide to work at the Wolf Sanctuary?
I've always had a love of wolves. I think that they're really fascinating creatures. They have really amazing social dynamics. Their pack bonds are super strong, and it's amazing to just see how their families interact and everything. But I've also found it really interesting that there's such extreme viewpoints about wolves. So, if people have a view on wolves, it's not usually benign. It's not just them, or mild. It's not them just casually, casting their view aside. It's usually very, very negative. They absolutely hate wolves. They don't want them around, or super positive. They have a beautiful respect for them, or this amazing viewpoint of them that might also not view them accurately. So I've always found that very interesting, that different dynamic and also how it affects their conservation. And I just wanted to be able to learn more about that and also find a way to help wolves and their plight in the wild. They're such iconic figures. They're throughout our fairy tales. They either make you feel very positive or very negative. So I just wanted to help them in some way. And so I started volunteering here 11 years ago and found that some of my skills were needed in the office as well. So I ended up applying and got hired for a position here. So I still volunteer 1 day a week, and then 4 days a week, I also work here. So
11 years, that's incredible. Out of these 11 years, do you have a favorite memory of working there?
That's such a hard one because there's so many different memories I've had. I mean, you develop all these bonds with different individuals. We have over 50 wolves and wolf dogs on the property, and those of us who work here and volunteer here develop a unique relationship with each and every single one of them in order to be able to care for them. So it's, developing those relationships has been amazing over the years. But I would say more specifically, one really interesting memory that I always, think back on has to do with how wolves develop trust. So part of why wolves don't belong in a household setting is it takes them a long time to build up trust. And working with and trusting humans is actually a learned behavior for them. It's not instinct. For domestic dogs, it's an instinct, man's best friend. But for wolves, it's not. They have to learn that over time. And it does take a long time, and it takes patience. And you also have to meet them at that individual level because they all have a different comfort level. So I specifically remember this one pack that was very shy. They had lived their whole life at the sanctuary. They were comfortable coming to the fence for food, but they never wanted to be touched or handled. The one male in the pack, he was one of the brothers, and he was kind of their protector. And I remember when I was training to start to help more to care for the wolves, we have 2 sets of fencing that people stand behind. And part of my training involved going one fence inward. So there was still a fence between me and the wolves, but I was now a little bit closer by that one fence. And I remember this one wolf, he noticed that I had moved a foot closer. I breached that first fence, and immediately he decided to stare at me to make sure to assess if I was safe for his family. He didn't care about, getting his treats from the other caretaker. He didn't care about anything except watching me and learning if I was safe. And it took a few more times of me going between the fences and him just watching me and learning and observing. And then one day he decided I was trustworthy, and he never was concerned again. Again, they never continued. They never wanted to be social. They never wanted to be pet. And that's totally fair. We respect all of their different preferences. But I did know that our relationship changed once he learned that I was trustworthy. And it just took time.
That's amazing. And going on to another one of your dogs, your wolf dogs, when I visited, I had the pleasure of seeing a wolf dog named Cusco. What struck me most about Cusco is his unique appearance. He looked exactly like a chocolate lab. Could you share his story and explain why Cusco, who looks like a chocolate lab, is at the wolf sanctuary?
Cusco's been with us for quite a few years, and he has a really interesting story, and a pretty standard story when it comes to, wolf rescue. Some of our rescues come from situations where people don't know how to care for them because they require a different level of care. And so they might be abused or neglected because people just don't understand how to handle a wolf or a wolf dog. Sometimes it's simply, illegal ownership. Somebody buys a wolf dog, maybe online or in a state where it's legal, and then brings them over to a state where it's illegal and they're confiscated. So those are pretty standard cases. In Cusco's case, his family, probably because of his appearance, had no idea that they were rescuing a wolf dog. And they got him from an SPCA, and he was labeled as I think a shepherd husky mix or something, or a lab husky mix, because he does have those floppy ears like a black lab, and he's pure black. They got him home though. And this is the thing about wolf dogs is you'll notice that they have a completely different set of behaviors. So those physical and behavioral characteristics can show through in any way. When you mix a wolf and a dog, even a low content wolf can still have a physical appearance that looks very wolf-like. It just depends on how the DNA shows through. Cusco's DNA ended up giving him floppy ears, but that behavior was still there. And the key with Cusco was separation anxiety. Dogs get it too. They freak out if their owners leave, but wolves and wolf dogs, because being with their pack is such a basic part of who they are, their separation anxiety is just absolutely extreme. So his owners noticed that he couldn't handle it if they left the house. He couldn't handle it if they left the room. He would try to knock down the bathroom door. He would shake and cower under the bed when they would return, and had severe anxiety. So they cared about him. They loved him a lot. He was so sweet with them. He was just absolutely not able to be left alone. So they brought him to a vet, and the vet suggested a DNA test, and it turned out that he had wolf in him. And, obviously they wanted him to get the proper care that he needed. And so they sought rescue pretty much right away. Luckily, we were able to have space to take in Cusco at the time. And once he was here, he was, again, very shy of people. It took him a long time to build up trust. We had to coax him with little treats and whatnot. But he really started to blossom once he met his pack mate, Shawnee. They have been smitten ever since. And I think it was 8 years ago or something that they were put together, and it was love at first sight. And he finally found his pack. He finally found his, where he was most comfortable. And he's still got those floppy, funny ears. But it's funny, if you kind of cover his face in pictures, his whole body looks like a wolf. And then, his face he's got the floppy ears. So he's been a big support. Just as a side note to Shawnee, she's had some health issues over the years. And she just actually recovered from ACL surgery, and he welcomed her back right away. He just adores her. Absolutely.
I absolutely loved Cusco when I went in. I mean, all your wolves and all your wolf dogs are absolutely stunning and brilliant. And it was just so interesting to see a dog that looked like a chocolate or black lab, but really was a wolf. So I just love that story. And
it's very unusual.
It is. And it is just a gem as well within the wolf sanctuary. It really shows just the depths that your organization goes to care for these species as a whole. So on that note, I'm sure some of our listeners would like to learn more about getting involved and even visiting the wolf sanctuary. How could they do this?
Visiting is the best way to, first step in learning about the sanctuary. We have really passionate volunteer tour guides who lead you through and talk about, wolf conservation and all of the, educational aspects about wolves. But then they also have unique stories about all of the individuals here. We all know them and all their personalities. So it's really cool to come and see animals like Cusco and learn about where they came from and who they are as individuals. We have public tours Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. You do need a reservation for those, which you can find on our website, wolfsanctuarypa.org. And they are in high demand. We open up availability at 10 o'clock in the morning on the first of each month for the month. So it's kind of month to month availability. And they go quick. So people should log on right away if they want a tour. We also have fundraisers twice a year. We just had one in May. It was amazing. People came out to see the wolves. It was great. We have one in October called Wolf Awareness Day. It's October 26th. That's open to the public, so you don't need a reservation. You can reserve if you want, but you don't have to. So that's kind of an option. If you can't get one of those tours that book up quick, you could always come for one of our more public events. We also have full moon fundraisers. Those are adult only. There are only age restricted events, 16 and over only. Those are the Saturday evening closest to the full moon. And you can check those dates out on our website as well.
Finally, as we talk about and celebrate 250 years of our nation in 2026, why do you think it's important to add wolves and preservation efforts to that conversation?
I think wolves are really a part of our history. I mean, they're baked right in. They were here before us. And as we started to develop land and encroach upon their habitat, there was, conflict. And I think that they're so important. As I mentioned, they're a keystone species. They're vital to the environment and to the survival of a ton of other species in the areas where they live. So if we want to have a thriving ecosystem and if we want to have those natural spaces to be true to the way that they should be, the way that they are naturally, then I think that we really need to focus on preserving all of the animals that live there, even the ones that may scare us because of an inherent prejudice that we might have because of fairy tales and things like that paint them that way. So I think getting to know them, lifting the veil on wolves and getting to know their true nature really helps with that. We don't need to have them as pets, but we don't need to fear them either. I think that they are super important to this country and who we are. And I think they deserve to survive.
Michelle, it was a pleasure having you and hearing about the sanctuary, your work, and your passion. It is people like you that allow the story of Pennsylvania wolves to remain steadfast and secure. Thank you for all that you do for our keystone species.
Thank you so much for having me again.
To our listeners, I hope you've enjoyed learning more about the creatures that once called Pennsylvania home. Though we no longer have a wild wolf population, our devoted wolf sanctuary of PA not only preserves our history, but also saves and reintroduces these magnificent animals to our protected lands. Their efforts are a testament to the importance of conservation and the impact that dedicated individuals can have on preserving our natural heritage. As we look ahead to celebrating 250 years of our nation in 2026, it's crucial to remember that our history isn't just about the milestone and events that have shaped us, but also the diverse ecosystems and wildlife that has shared this land with us. The story of Pennsylvania's wolves is a powerful reminder of the delicate balance between human progress and nature. If you're inspired by today's episode, consider visiting the Wolf Sanctuary of PA or supporting them through volunteer work. Every effort helps in the fight to protect and preserve our keystone species. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Pennsylvania's rich past and vibrant present. Keep tuning into our podcast for more fascinating stories and insights from across the Commonwealth. Until next time, stay PA proud.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cassandra Coleman, Executive Director of America 250 PA. Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. We encourage you to learn more about America 250 PA and send us your podcast ideas at america250pa.org.
This has been the America 250 PA Start Here, America Did podcast, produced by Commonwealth Media Services. Stay tuned for more epic Pennsylvania stories at america250pa.org.